The exhibition is called Camp, Notes on Fashion, and it was inspired by Susan Sontag's 1964 essay, Notes on Camp, that in a way outlined the elements or characteristics of camp: irony, humour, parody, theatricalization, excess, extravagance, exaggeration. The first half of the exhibition does trace the origins of camp. The introduction is a section called The Camp Beau Ideal. It focuses on the figure of Antinous, Hadrian's lover, who has been embraced in the queer culture by artists like Robert Mapplethorpe. Each gallery has a hero or heroine. So it starts off with Louis XIV and his brother Monsieur, famous bisexual. I wanted to trace the etymological origins of camp. And the first time it was mentioned that we found is camp as a verb in a novel by Molière, Scapin. Scapin talks about camping on one leg like a comedy king. So immediately it has connotations of theatricality and performativity. Chevalier Dion was a spy able to infiltrate the courts of Europe as a lady-in-waiting. In a way, he was a precursor to camp and its relationship to cross-dressing in the 18th century. So we have a wonderful dress by Jean-Paul Gaultier that's based on an 18th century silhouette, worn with man's suit in the 20th century. So it's a conflation of both masculine and feminine dress codes. By the mid-19th century, camp became associated with the queer community. We look at the idea of camp as an adjective, campy or campish. We've traced its first origin to the mid-19th century in a letter between Fanny and Stella. They were prosecuted on cross-dressing. And the hero of another gallery is Oscar Wilde, famous for his epigrams. And through his trials and the criminalization of homosexuality in the late 19th century, he became a potent vehicle for camp as a noun, as a person. And in that particular section, we have garments inspired by Oscar's wardrobe, both as an aesthete and also as a dandy. One of the first times that camp became associated with a style was in 1954 through Christopher Isherwood's The World in the Evening, where he makes a demarcation between low camp, something located in the queer world, and high camp, meaning Baroque art, the ballet. In 1934, Paul Cadmus painted a man wearing a very tailored tight suit with a red tie and bleached blonde hair, which are all signifiers of queer culture in the early 20th century. Surrounded by sailors, sailor being very much a camp icon in the queer community. So in the Sontagian camp section, we are selecting works of art from the Met's collection to illustrate her ideas of camp. She highlights Crivelli, Caravaggio, Mannerist painting. She highlights Tiffany lamps, Art Nouveau. In terms of fashion, she highlights beaded dresses from the 1920s. All ideas of exaggeration and artifice. Susan wrote camp as a response to the pop art movement, particularly to Warhol. Warhol became obsessed by Susan after she published Camp and referred to her as Miss Camp. It catapulted her as a celebrity, so she became, in a way, one of Andy Warhol's superstars. One of the defining characteristics she talks about in her essays is this idea of failed seriousness. Too much, so to speak. Too fantastic, it's too extravagant, it's just too. And she makes a distinction between naive camp and deliberate camp. Naive camp she finds is much more rewarding because it was unconscious, as opposed to deliberate camp, which was more self-conscious. We're using the idea of failed seriousness as a bridge to a section that is about posturing and about extravagant gesture. The second half of the exhibition we've called Camp Eye, focusing on examples of the camp aesthetic in fashion post Sontag's essay. Each mannequin has a particular statement that articulates a particular aspect of camp. Susan talks about how camp is a manifestation of snob taste, how camp is the dandyism of mass culture. Having one logo isn't camp. Having a whole suit completely emblazoned with logos is camp. We have a section called the psychopathology of affluence. We have a Jeremy Scott that's printed with dollar bills. Historicism is very much part of a camp ideology. Notions of performativity are included in a section on the ballet and the opera as vehicles of camp. We have Bjork's famous dress that she wore to the Academy Awards, in the design of a swan, where the swan's neck is literally wrapping around her neck. We also have an opera coat designed by Marc Jacobs that has a jacquard of the opera star Maria Callas. Camp is a second childhood, the idea of a baby doll dress on a grown woman and indeed a grown man. It's a camp statement. We have a section called the mode of enjoyment that references the generosity behind camp. One example is a coat shaped like a love heart, dyed red. And we have a dress that's styled as a bouquet of flowers. Camp is a gift that keeps on giving. Camp is for people who are heroes but didn't set out to be heroes. And for that statement, you have a floor-length coat made out of faux fur, out of the rainbow flag, from Christopher Bailey's last collection from Burberry, which was a celebration of queer culture. Gender with genitals looks at exaggerated ideas of masculinity and femininity. And we have a wonderful dress by John Paul Gaultier that on the runway was worn by Lynn Evangelista with a hairdryer that pumped air into her garment to amplify her breasts and her buttocks. We also have a jacket by Walter van Beirendonck with inflatable muscles, this ridiculous He-Man as a vehicle for the camp aesthetic. Part of that section is also the idea of gender without genitals, which looks at younger designers like Palomo Spain, who are trying to upend gender distinctions within dress to create non-binary clothing. We have a wonderful bridegroom and bride in one, a sort of Victor Victoria reference by Tom Brown, but the front of it is a man's tuxedo and behind is a wedding dress. We have one category called things being what they're not, which was a statement taken from Susan's essay directly, a dress in the form of a wedding cake by Christian Lacroix. Camp is inherently subjective, and that's part of its power and part of its charm, the fact that it's always changing. So you leave the exhibition still wondering what camp is and being encouraged to think about one's own definition of camp.
Camp is happiness.
Camp is a mode of perception.
Is by its very nature
Camp
political,
is alive.
subversive.
Dandyism.